Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I think I got like 5 good mornings, maybe if I was lucky. So we're gonna rewind, okay? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. Thank you. And welcome to the 13th Annual Fair and Affordable Housing Summit here in the beautiful city of Winston-Salem. My name is Wanda Allen Aberhot, and I'm the Director of the Human Relations Department with the City of Winston-Salem. We're very delighted and excited to welcome you here today. And we know that many of you came from out of town, and so we're happy that you had safe travels as you were coming here to Winston-Salem from across the state, from Rocky Mount, from Fayetteville, Charlotte, all the different cities that are represented here today. We welcome you. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our program. Everyone should have an agenda in front of them. It looks like this. Everyone should have an agenda. We will be following the agenda today. And on that note, I am going to go ahead and welcome our very esteemed mayor, Alan Joines, who is the mayor here in Winston-Salem. Mayor Joines is a very big supporter, obviously, of our community, but also in the fight to ensure equal, fair, and affordable housing for everyone. And so we're very fortunate to have a mayor who does endorse and actually support what we do every single day. Because all of us are involved in housing in this room in some way or another. Whether we're bankers, lenders, CDCs, neighborhood associations, or government officials, we're involved. And so we do have someone who can lead us right on down the path that we need to go down here in Winston-Salem. So Mayor Joines, without further ado, would you please come on up? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Is it still morning? Yeah, it's still morning. Glad to be here today as we commemorate the 50th anniversary. Can you believe that? 50th anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act. We were just talking beforehand that 1968 was a very turbulent year with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, but then some good things came out of that as well with this act. Joined today with a number of my colleagues on the City Council, Councilmember Jeff McIntosh from the Northwest Ward, Councilmember Derwin Montgomery from the East Ward, whom you will hear from a little bit later on, and Councilmember John Larson from the South Ward. And our city attorney, assistant city attorney is here, Al Andrews, to keep us all straight, I guess, Al. Always good to have. And I saw our assistant city managers, Page and Ford, are here as well. Thank you for being here. You know, fair housing, and I come to this event every year, and fair housing is always important, always been important for us, but I think, Dan, it's even more important today as we see so much going on in our communities. Seen some good things happening, urban revitalization occurring. Here in Winston-Salem, there's been about $1.7 billion of investment in our center city in the past 20 years, which is great news, but in a lot of cases it's done some things that are not so good, and that is the word the gentrification that occurs sometimes in our neighborhoods as work happens there. So we want to work hard to prevent that if we can. Under the leadership of our city council, and in particular Councilmember Montgomery, who chairs our Community Development Housing General Government Committee, the city's adopted a policy that anytime we do a project with a developer, housing project, we require that developer to put a certain percentage of those units as affordable units. And then secondly, we're just completing, not too long, and Councilmember Montgomery may talk about this, so I don't want to steal his thunder, a housing study that is projecting that the city of Winston-Salem, the community, the little c, Winston-Salem, is probably going to need 8,000 or 9,000 affordable units over the next 10 or 15 years. So that's a big challenge for us as a community, challenge for you as providers and lenders and individuals who are involved in this market. We are taking it seriously as a city. We've had our past bond issue in 2014. We had, I think, about $12 million for affordable housing on that. We're proposing another bond issue that will be taken to the voters in November that will also have, again, about $12 million for housing development. That'll help us get started, but we'll probably need more to hit that number. But my role today is pretty simple. To issue a proclamation on behalf of the city of Winston-Salem. Whereas the month of April is recognized throughout the United States as Fair Housing Month. As I said, this marks the 50th anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act, which provides equal opportunity to all Americans in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. And whereas illegal barriers to equal opportunity in housing, no matter how subtle, diminish the rights of all. And whereas Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of '68, as amended, set forth a national policy of fair housing without regard to race, color, nationality, religion, gender, familial status, and disability. And whereas the Winston-Salem Human Relations Commission is charged with enforcing the local fair housing ordinance, and whereas the local Human Relations Commission promotes the belief that equal housing is an important component of our diverse community, and whereas ongoing education, outreach, and monitoring are key to raising the awareness of fair housing principles, practices, rights, and responsibilities. And whereas the City of Winston-Salem fully supports the intents and purposes of the Federal Fair Housing Act, and in 1982 we adopted the Fair Housing Ordinance and did a revision in 1990 to include the 2 new protected classes of handicapped and families with children. Now therefore, I, Alan Joines, Mayor of the City of Winston-Salem, do hereby proclaim April 2018 as Fair Housing Month in Winston-Salem, and I urge all of our citizens to take note of that. So I wanted to thank you and the members of the Commission for all the hard work that you do to enforce that act. I'm sure happy.
Thank you, Mayor Joines. And next, we're going to be joined by the Chair of the Human Relations Commission, Ms. Sylvia Durant, and we will have the Vice Chair of the Human Relations Commission, Mr. Robert Leake.
Good morning. It is so good to see you here today, and I'm joined by the Vice Chair of the Commission, Mr. Robert Leake, Mayor Joines, City Council members, and distinguished guests. My name is Sylvia Durant, and I'm Chairperson of the Human Relations Commission. I'm honored to have a moment here to say a few words on behalf of the Commission. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for participating in this important event today, which very much highlights the need for housing fairness for all and fair and affordable housing choices. As you all know, this work cannot happen with many key community partnerships, including city government, elected officials, bankers and lenders, community development corporations, housing industry professionals, other municipalities, nonprofits, and local, state, and federal governmental agencies. The Human Relations Commission of Winston-Salem is comprised of citizens who serve on a volunteer basis as an advisory board to the Human Relations Department and city government. I would like to ask my fellow commissioners, who come from many fields and walks of life, to stand and be recognized. So we have with us Jeffrey Bloomfield, Commissioner, and of course, Vice Chair Robert Leake. Again, we appreciate so much your being here today and all the work that we are doing together to promote fair housing. Thank you. And now I'm introducing my wonderful colleague, Vice Chair Robert Leake, to make a few remarks on behalf of the New Horizons Fair Housing Committee.
Good afternoon. It's lunchtime. As we kick off today's luncheon in celebration of the fair housing, it's important for us to look back at the landmark legislation that helped to bring us to this point. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 reversed decades of overlay and more suitable discriminatory housing practices and established a number of critical protections still important today. This year, we celebrate as a city the 50th year anniversary of the 1968 signing of the Civil Rights Act by President Lyndon B. Johnson. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act into law in 1968 following a prolonged legislative battle and on the heels of the tragedy assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The act extended the basic discrimination protections within the 1964 Civil Rights Act into the housing market. It prohibits discrimination in housing on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and following amendments in 1988. Familial status and disability. The act also protects specific types of real estate activity from discrimination, primarily aspects of the sale, rental, and financing of dwellings. Today, the Fair Housing Act serves as a foundational legal protection from a discrimination in housing. However, despite its judicial success, it remains subject to significant debate, often regarding lingering residential segregation, the application of disparate impacts, and the mandate affirmative, further fair housing. But by the console signing of the Civil Rights Act, we as the Fair Housing Committee, as well the Human Relations Commission, believes that everyone has a right to affordable, decent housing despite their economic needs. So let us continue to push forward in creating affordable, decent housing for all citizens here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. Thank you. And before I sit down, I do want to acknowledge some of our neighborhood association leaders. I know that we had a lot of our gold and silver sponsors, but at the end of the day, we know we cannot do this work without neighborhood leaders who also has the boots on the ground. So I just want you guys, they don't know this, but I want them to stand up and raise their hand. So Miss Diane Fitzgerald from Boston Thurman Neighborhood Association, Miss Rosa Johnson from Boston Thurman, Miss Mary Ford, Boston Thurman, Miss Shannon Brooks, Easton Neighborhood Association, Miss Deborah Mao, Southeast Neighborhood Association. I know Miss Carolyn Highsmith, Condo Hills Neighborhood Association. I know she couldn't be here yet. And then Monticello Park and Castle Heights as well. So thank you guys for coming. We appreciate you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, and Mr. Black, thank y'all for coming as well. I did not turn to my right, so don't turn it to my heart. Thank you. At this time, we'll have Miss Attorney Dr. I said doctor, but Miss Allen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Leake. Now, what I'd like to do is to give you a little overview of why you are here. In the Human Relations Department, one of the key responsibilities that we have is enforcing the fair housing law on behalf of the city of Winston-Salem. And what that means is we investigate claims of housing discrimination here within the jurisdiction of the city. So anything that comes up that's related to housing, from tenants primarily that pertain to discrimination based on race, color, gender, national origin, religion, family status, and I forgot the seventh one, gee whiz. Disability. Thank you. Thank you, the adaptables. Yeah. But anyway, that's what happens when you don't write these things down. But yes, so we investigate those types of discrimination claims. And those claims are more prevalent than many of you would ever realize. We see this happening on a daily basis. The problem is most people do not understand and know their rights. We have found that to be a challenge throughout the years. And I've been in this position as Human Relations Director for 17 years. And I can tell you that most people do not understand that they have protections. And that is particularly true for those who are in this country from other countries, who are legal residents and who may not even have legal status. They don't understand that they are protected as well, even though they do not have legal status in the United States. So those are some of the unique challenges that we have and that we face on a daily basis. And certainly we couldn't do the work that we do without community partners such as yourselves. And so it's really important to bring everyone together at least once a year to talk about the different and various housing trends that we're seeing in our respective areas. Because what we see in City Hall is not going to be necessarily what the nonprofits are seeing. or what some of the lenders may be hearing, and so on and so forth. So it's important to network, it's important to share updates, it's important to share information, because I think for most of us in this room, we have a very like-minded mission, and that is to make sure that people have equal and fair access to housing. And so again, a part of what we do is not only investigate, but we do outreach, obviously, such as this type of program today. So the key is just to make sure that we work together. One other thing that is an emerging thing is the fact that we are a very diverse community. We're more diverse than we've ever been here locally, and probably statewide, I would say. And one of the reasons for that is because we are having an influx of immigrants and refugees who are being relocated to North Carolina. Once upon a time, Winston-Salem had the highest count of Hispanic residents in North Carolina. I would guess that's probably still the case. I haven't seen the stats recently, but that says a lot about how this community is growing and the fact that we need to grow right along with it. We have to develop measures and make sure that everyone has equal access to government services and community resources. And so we've been doing work with our Building Integrated Communities program and other programs that foster relationships with all individuals in Winston-Salem, whether they're citizens or residents. And lastly, of course, that ties into what I'm about to delve into with cultural inclusion, is making sure that we celebrate one another's differences and commonalities. And the way we do that is varied. We do it through the International Village Food and Music Festival. We do it through a lot of the outreach programs that we do that tailor to specific agencies and so on. So again, that's a very big nutshell of what human relations is all about. And that's what makes today so special, with seeing all of you here in the audience too. Because we do have a whole lot of community partners and support. We do not take that lightly. Not all communities can say that. So I would like to give you all a round of applause, or we can give each other a round of applause, however way you want to look at it, for what we do every day. And this is a great segue into recognizing our sponsors. Sponsors, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, we being the New Horizons Fair Housing Committee and the City of Winston-Salem. Our title sponsors this year, we were very fortunate to have 3 title sponsors. We have BB&T, Fairway Independent Mortgage Company, and the Piedmont-Triad Apartment Association. And so I would like to invite our title sponsors to come up to the podium if they would like to share a few remarks. If they don't want to, that's okay. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But if you would like to share a few remarks, I would invite you to come on up to the podium. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to formally thank you. BB&T, thank you.
Is it morning or afternoon? Almost afternoon. By the time I finish, it'll be afternoon. So I'll say good afternoon, everyone. I am Sandra Braswell with BB&T. I am our CRA Community Fair Lending Manager for our mortgage division. And I am so excited about being here today. I am a native of Winston-Salem. I live right outside the Chapel Hill area since I went to school in Chapel Hill. My parents both are from Winston-Salem, and my mother has 15 brothers and sisters. So I guarantee you, every community that you mentioned today, I have relatives in every community. So it is exciting. Here at BB&T, we want to make sure that all we see is you. We want to make sure that you understand that we really value the partnerships that you have, and really we have a sincere desire to make sure that we extend credit in all of those communities. I want to take just a few minutes to introduce the team I have here with me with BB&T. I have John Stokes, who is our Community Development Specialist for the entire state of North Carolina. I have Jacoby Harrell, who is the Community Mortgage Specialist here in Winston-Salem, and Fred Graves, who is also our Community Mortgage Specialist in Greensboro. And you notice all of their titles have community in it, because that is what it is about for us. I want to thank my father, Ike Black, for being here. He was not going to be missed either way from Ladera Crest, and he is retired, parole probation, so he made sure I didn't get in trouble while I was in Winston-Salem. But he also ensures that I continue to understand the importance of serving our community. Many times I ask what BB&T means, and people don't know. They think it's the best bank in town, and we love that response. But it is Branch Bank and Trust, and we do know that trust is very important to what we do. and how we serve our communities. We trust our realtors to help our families find the properties we need. We trust our city government to make sure that you all have the support in your community organizations, and we have the inventory that we need. We trust your community partners to help with the down payment. So we are here to let you know that we're here to make our communities a better place to live and work. So thank you for letting us partner with you today.
It's hard to believe another year has gone by. Sometimes the days seem very long, but the years do fly. It'll be 30 years in July since I moved to Winston-Salem. My mom was a native, born and raised here. She'll turn 81 in July. 30 years is a long time. I bought my first home in July of 1988. And who knew at that point in time when I bought the house, not only would I find my first home, but I'd find a career of a lifetime and such an amazing community. 10 years, a little over 10 years ago, I found my Fairway family. And I am grateful every day to be surrounded by so many people who help me understand that the true meaning of community is inclusion, celebrating diversity, helping each other, and giving back. And so I am honored to be here. I am grateful to be here. And I am so thankful that all of you are here. And I hope I see you again next year. And it'll seem like tomorrow when it happens. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm John Lowder. I'm the Executive Director for the Piedmont-Triad Apartment Association, which is an association that nobody here has probably heard of, and that's our fault. We represent 65,000 apartment units throughout the Triad, 20,000 of them here in Winston-Salem. We have had tradition over 30 years of some deep partnership opportunities, really over in Guilford County more so than here, and we are looking to change that. We've opened an office here in Winston-Salem. I'm also, I should have started with my Winston-Salem creds, which is I'm native here also, moved away as a child to Washington, D.C., then came back. My family has deep roots here. I also have cousins everywhere, so if you enter a neighborhood, one of us is there, so be careful. We celebrate Fair Housing Month by honoring the tradition of fair housing. One of the key things we do is provide fair housing training to our membership, which are mostly market rate providers, so that they can avoid not just intentional fair housing violations, but the unintentional fair housing violations that happen, especially when you're employing 22-year-olds straight out of school, people as leasing professionals, and they truly don't know what they're doing in trying to be helpful might be wrong. So we try to address the entire spectrum. But most importantly, we really want to be partners, finding solutions for housing affordability in particular. We realize the strain that is being experienced by our community, and that is actually probably going to get worse. If you look at the demographics and the studies out there, affordability is going to be an issue for years to come, and we want to be partners in addressing that situation, and we want to be partners in addressing the community's challenges. So we're very grateful to have been invited to be a sponsor, and we're very happy to be here, and I look forward to seeing much more of you in the future years. Thank you.
Thank you, title sponsors. And we also have platinum sponsors to whom we are very grateful, as we are with all of our sponsors. The platinum sponsors are listed on the agenda. They are the City of Charlotte Community Relations Committee, the City of Winston-Salem Community Development Department, the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem, Piedmont-Triad Savings Bank, I'm sorry, Piedmont-Triad is in my head, and Piedmont Federal Savings Bank, and North Carolina Housing Foundation, and of course PNC Bank. Would any of our platinum sponsors care to share a few brief remarks before we move on? If so, we welcome you to come on up.
I think it is officially afternoon, so good afternoon. I'm very proud to be part of PNC and part of our community. I'm going to represent the people who are coming to this community because it's such a wonderful place to live, are not born and raised here, but are choosing to relocate and make this their home. As part of PNC, it is our passion and our desire to serve everyone in our community and do that through our community involvement, as well as the people who serve the community in our branch system and behind the scenes. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be part of PNC, and I look forward to the panel and the day we have ahead of us.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Boston. I'm staff attorney for the Housing Authority of the City of Winston-Salem. Thank you all so much for coming here today. I wanted to explain a little bit about what we do as the Housing Authority. We work to provide safe, decent, and affordable housing to people in the City of Winston-Salem through real estate development and property management. In addition, our focus in order to achieve that goal is primarily through the administration of the public housing and housing choice voucher programs, essential programs for maintaining affordability and providing homes to those that need it. The Housing Authority provides assistance to over 5,800 households in the City of Winston-Salem. Essential services that we see as a foundation for other projects and other activities we have undertaken through the leadership of our CEO, Mr. Larry Woods, who I want to extend a special thanks to. We have managed to develop several hundred units of affordable housing, and we have development plans for many more, as you'll see on our upcoming projects and currently finished accomplishments sheet. Thank you again so much for your time and for this getting together today to talk about affordable housing, and look forward to sharing this time with y'all.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ann Holland. I'm with Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. Piedmont Federal is very proud to be a sponsor and contributor for this event. We are, I guess we're all talking about being from Winston-Salem, and we're very proud to say that we are local. We are Winston-Salem, and we have worked with a lot of the community partners in the room. We've worked with other organizations, Habitat for Humanity, various other agencies here, and we're very proud to be a sponsor and to work with all of the people of this great city. I would like to point out my table over there for Piedmont Federal, and we certainly appreciate having been a sponsor for the past 13 years and even before. And we are looking forward for the opportunity to do so again and to work with everyone in this great city and great area to help with affordable housing and to help basically have the American dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. And again, let's give all of our sponsors a round of applause, please. All of you. And you will see all of the sponsors' logos on the bottom of the agenda. And please take the time before you leave today to look at the highlight sheet that we have with your agendas on your tables, because you will probably be extremely impressed by a lot of the exciting developments that are going on here in Winston-Salem and a lot of the work that our community partners are undertaking on a daily basis. Right now, we're at a very special part in the program because we are about to award our annual Fair Housing Breaking Barriers Award. This award goes to a local organization every year that works hard, very hard, to promote fair housing in some aspect. And this year's awardee, or awardees, I should say, all of them actually need to be recognized, is the Adaptables, which is an organization that has been in Winston-Salem for quite some time. The Adaptables actually has a really strong history with the City of Winston-Salem and the Human Relations Commission. And so we're going to get into that probably a little bit later. But what I would like to do right now is to go ahead and cue the video so that you can learn a little bit more about what they do on a daily basis.
As a Center for Independent Living, we do provide these various core services, which include independent living skills training, peer support, information and referral. Most recently, we've gotten into nursing home transitions and youth transitions. So all centers around the country will provide these same core services, but we also provide individual needs to our local communities. The Adaptables focus is on maintaining someone's independence in the community. So we are always looking at just initially physical accessibility. Is there a ramp? Is there a curb cut? Is there a way to get into the building? Is there a way for someone with a disability to have equal access to services and goods that anyone else would have? Housing has become a huge issue in this area, the 6 counties that we cover, and it's hard. It's getting harder and harder to find affordable, accessible housing for consumers. It can be a tremendous wait from anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for someone just to need affordable, accessible housing. There's a lot of housing out there, not a lot of it is affordable and accessible. What we do here is how I feel in my heart and soul how services should be provided. We're not asking for anything that is out of the ordinary, we're just asking for equal access. That's all we want. We just want a level playing field, and there's a lot of fields out there that aren't level at this time, and so we've got a lot of work to do, but it's a challenge that we welcome and we look forward to.
Hope you enjoyed the video and you got a little better understanding of what the Adaptables actually does on a daily basis and how special they are to our community, under the leadership of Executive Director Mr. Mark Steele. So at this time, I would like to have every member of the New Horizons Fair Housing Committee to come forward so that we can present the award to the Adaptables. Committee members, could you come forward, please? Mr. Steele, on behalf of the City of Winston-Salem, the Human Relations Commission, and the Commission's New Horizons Fair Housing Committee, we award you and the Adaptables the 2018 Breaking Barriers Fair Housing Award for the outstanding work that you do in our community each and every day. Thank you very much.
See, we know how to adapt. I would like to say thank you so much for recognizing us for basically what we do on a daily basis. It's nice to get recognized for what you're doing. As you saw in the video, those of us that work there, we believe in our hearts that we're doing the right thing, and we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say this award goes to the Adaptables and my staff, because they are the ones out in the field working with the consumers on a daily basis, trying to find housing and working with them. They come to me all the time with their success stories, but also some of the issues that they're running into. And so we'd like to take this time to stress the need for more affordable, accessible housing in this area and the 6 counties that we do cover. I did notice that there's a listing at the federal government for some more vouchers, so I'm hoping the Housing Authority here in Winston-Salem will apply for that, because as I said in the video, it is getting tougher and tougher, and the need is just growing from what we can see. So thank you again for having us today, and we look forward to the rest of the program.
Thanks again, Mr. Steele, and to your entire team for all that you do for our city. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we are going to be moving into our keynote address. And as soon as the keynote address concludes, we will begin lunch service, which is a buffet right outside these doors. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about our keynote speaker and all of the wonderful work that he does in our community. Our keynote today is Council Member from the East Ward, Derwin L. Montgomery. Council Member Montgomery has been a member of the Winston-Salem City Council since 2009. And at the time of his election, he was the youngest city council member in the United States. Also, he is the youngest ever elected to the city council in the city of Winston-Salem. So that in and of itself is a great accomplishment. Councilmember Montgomery hails to us from South Carolina. He is a graduate of Winston-Salem State University, and he is also a graduate of Duke Divinity School. He is pastor of First Calvary Baptist. He is also the executive director of the Bethesda Center for the Homeless, and he serves as chair of the General Government Committee. So without further ado, I would like to call Councilmember Derwin Montgomery up to the podium to share his keynote remarks with us today. Councilmember Montgomery?
Thank you, Wanda, for that. And she prefaced the statements that I am what's standing between you and lunch. So I think she said that to ensure that I would keep brevity in mind. Before I begin my comments, I just want to simply say thank you to all of you all who are here today and for your presence today on such an occasion as this. And then also to the many sponsors who thought it important to make this type of investment at this time in what's happening in our communities. To all of the sponsors, I say thank you, but an important thank you, I say, to Fairway Independent Mortgage. For when I first bought my first house in 2010, it was because of Fairway Independent Mortgage helping me to purchase my first home. So you all will always have a special place in my heart for the work that you all do in this community and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity at accessing housing. So thank you for your work as well. The year was 1966, and Lyndon Baines Johnson gathered a group of people in the White House together, a small group of folks, together in the White House, and they began to have a conversation about how this nation moved towards a place of ensuring that many of the rights that had been included in the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 65 could be expanded. And there in that room, he committed himself and he wrote a note to Congress, urging them to pass a bill that would give fair and equitable housing opportunities to all the citizens across the country. And these are the words that Lyndon Johnson used in requesting. He said, the enactment of the first effective laws against the discrimination of the sale and rental of housing in the United States is needed. The first effective law. For surely there in our communities, there were some who argued for and pushed for the fact that we did not need to discriminate when it came to housing, but how effective were those laws? And in 1966, we didn't get a Fair Housing Act. In 1967, we didn't get a Fair Housing Act. But it was in 1968 when Congress came to their senses and passed the Fair Housing Act. It had been passed at the end of 1967 in the House and in the Senate in 1968. But we've already heard about what was happening in this time, that this passed on April the 10th, 1968. 2 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Some historians will argue that the reason that Congress moved after a year of allowing this bill to stay in Congress so quickly was because of what was happening in the country around us. That by passing this act and by allowing President Johnson to sign it, that it would be one step in helping to subside the chaos that was happening in this country. But for whatever reason that Congress decided to pass this bill, it was passed. And it extended protections across this community in areas in ways that we are still grappling with and still challenged today to continue to make a difference in. The signing took place at a tumultuous time in our country, and some could argue today that we remain in a time in which this type of legislation is even more important as we begin to look at the challenges that we face, not only here in this city, but across the state and across the country, that we are in what many have described a housing crisis, where the needs of the people in communities are so great and the ability for communities to provide that housing seems not to be up to par. The protections of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, as many of us call the Fair Housing Act, those protections are needed even more today than they've ever been needed, I believe, in history. And the work of each and every person in this room to not only ensure that the protections of this act remain in place, but the work to undo the centuries of impacts of discriminatory practices in our community remains. And what does that mean? That means that in communities today, 50 years after the signing of this act, communities are still dealing with the impacts of discriminatory practices of housing in those communities. Today, communities are still suffering from hundreds of years of redlining, hundreds of years of individuals not having the ability to buy a home, rent a home, or live in the community that they want to live in. And not only is that the case today, but the ability to afford housing has become one of the greatest challenges to the American dream that we've seen. For the picture of a two-story home, white picket fence, 2.5 kids, and a dog named Bob is not the dream that everybody has an opportunity to access. And so the questions become to us, what is it that we will do to ensure that fair and affordable housing exists in our communities, that it exists not only for us today, but it exists for generations to come? What are the actions that we take to ensure that this happens? Housing issues was one of the key reasons why I decided to run for public office. As a student at Winston-Salem State University, I saw a dramatic difference between the community in which my institution resides in and the communities around this city of Winston-Salem. And I made up in my mind that I wanted to do something about that I didn't want to talk about the challenges and the issues, but I wanted to be a part of a solution that helped us move towards equitable opportunities in housing in our community. That's why we strive for and we fought in the city of Winston-Salem to ensure that we would put policies in place that would change how we do business. That's why for the first time this city passed an ordinance, affordable housing ordinance, that the mayor mentioned earlier, that ensures that if we put 1 penny of city dollars in any housing development, that at least 20% of all of that housing has to be catered towards individuals who meet affordable housing standards. That's just one step, and it requires so much more for us to do, but never before have we tied such strings to the dollars that we invest. Not only that, but we begin to look at, well, what truly is affordable housing? For some who are elected, everybody doesn't understand that there is a need for affordable housing. So the questions became, well, what is affordable housing in our communities, and how do we define the ability of having affordable housing in our community? So we commissioned an affordable housing ordinance that is beginning to take a look at what are the needs that we have to ensure that affordable housing exists in the city of Winston-Salem. And the emerging data is something that we all have to grapple and wrestle with, because it is saying to us that at least 8,000 units are going to be needed over the next 10 to 15 years for affordable housing, meaning people who are at least 80% of area median income. But the vast majority of those 8,000 units, the data is suggesting to us, must be catered to individuals that are at 50% or below of area median income. That means that there's a whole lot of work for us to do in this community, across this state, and even across this nation when it comes to dealing with issues of affordable housing. Because if we don't, those of us in this room today who enjoy not being cost burdened with our housing will be impacted. If we do nothing, those of us who have no issue in finding and renting a home or renting someplace to stay, we will be impacted because our prices will rise just like everybody else's prices will rise. These ordinances touch everyday people. Just like one of the members of the team where I work every day, who's a grandmother and who came to this community for a better opportunity and a better job. She's already raised her children, but now she's raising her grandchild. And she needed to be in a place that would be close and accessible to her job, but also childcare, close and accessible to schools. And that meant that she needed to live somewhere close to downtown Winston-Salem. And unfortunately, not until about a year ago was there a place in downtown Winston-Salem where affordable housing was there. But because of the city's investment in 757 North development, we brought affordable housing to downtown Winston-Salem. And she's one of the residents who now is in walking distance to her job, being able to take her grandson to daycare and being able to pick him up from school within 5 minutes of her getting off work. That is what dealing with fair and affordable housing looks like, touching the everyday person who's challenged just like us. Some people think that when people talk about affordable housing that we're talking about people who don't want to work, people who don't care about where they live or what they desire to have in life. But the fact is that we're talking about everyday people. Everyday people just like you and I who are in this room who just simply don't make enough money all the time to be able to afford the luxury condos and housing that is important to communities, but just the mere fact of being able to have the bare necessities. And so that's why the fight for fair and affordable housing in this community, in this state, and across this country is so important today, is because as populations continue to grow, the demand continues to increase. And how will communities respond to that demand? How will we respond to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be able to have a roof over their head? The fact is that the fight is similar to what it was in 1960s. As someone who looks back at history, the 1960s, in my opinion, produced some of the greatest and most progressive policies that this country has seen since the Great Depression. And today we are in need of the courage of people like that and in that time to be able to step up to the plate to ensure that the promises of these policies are actually seen for everyday people. For it's one thing to have things in policy, it's another thing to make sure that it can actually work. And for many of us in this room, we probably confronted some policy, someplace, that on its face meant good, but it didn't have the teeth and the nails to be able to make the difference in the lives of the people that we try to help every day. And that's why it's so important for all of us in this room today to be able to commit themselves to being able to do something that ensures that in the future, affordable and fair housing is truly accessible and the opportunity exists for every citizen in this community, across this state, and those who are working with national organizations, that impact is true for people across this country. Fair, quality, and affordable housing speaks to the essence of the American dream that so many of us in this room may experience, but the fact of the matter is that that dream still is so far from reach for many people in this community, many people who you can look out the back window of the Benton Convention Center and see their homes, see their neighborhoods and their communities, and that ability for them to access still is challenging. All the while we in this room are working in organizations, institutions that understand this challenge, that understand that there's a problem, that there are many people outside of this room who don't understand the problem the way that you do. They don't understand the challenges that you face every day on your job. They don't understand how someone truly can be discriminated on based upon their race, their color, the fact that they have a disability, the fact that they're a mother with 3 children, the fact that they're not from this community, the fact that they look different. For many people, that has not been their reality. And so it's challenging for them to understand it. But for those whose reality it has been, and for those who have worked with individuals whose reality that has been, it is incumbent upon all of us to advocate and to share those stories in a way where it helps us to move further as a community, further as a state, and further improving the quality of the policies that are in place for us. So what is a charge for us to do today? We do this work. We come to these type of events every year. But what difference does coming into this place and this space make in the work that you do every day? I would leave you with a few challenges, a few things that you can do to go back and make a difference in the work. And some of it will be some things that you may have to ponder on whether or not you believe that it's the right fight to fight or whether or not it truly furthers fair housing. But in my opinion, it does. When we think about the fight to ensure that every individual, no matter their economic status, has an opportunity at affordable and fair housing, it means that we have to challenge communities, developers, cities, towns across this community to step up to the plate and make investments that are strategic and impactful in communities that need them the most. And sometimes it may not be popular, but it's what's necessary. Sometimes it may not be the thing that everybody believes in, but it's the thing that we must do. And I'm not naive enough to believe that developers and others don't want to build affordable housing. I understand that finances oftentimes come into play. And that's why we at this community have pushed at state legislature to ensure that there are more opportunities in this state and around this community to have more affordable housing, whether it's increasing the dollars that are available with tax credits or being able to have flexibility with rules and guidelines that exist. But we have to push harder to those who are making decisions, open the door for everyone to have an opportunity. Sometimes it means that even the fights that we have on different fronts must translate into the fights that we have on the side of housing. For many people have galvanized together around how we work to have reform in the criminal justice system, but that reform has to translate over into housing. The same way that we have fought tirelessly in this community and across this state and all over this country around how we ban the box for individuals for employment, we have to fight like heck to ensure that the box is banned for people who want to get housing but have fallen on bad times and have found themselves incarcerated, that because they have paid their time, we have to ensure that they have some place to call home. And all of us may or may not agree with that, but the fact is that it is a barrier, and we see it every day in work, that because people have a record, that they can't get someplace to be housed because people don't want them there, even though they paid their price and paid their debt to society. And what does that do? That increases the financial burdens on communities because they will either do one or two things. They will find some place to stay, or they'll find some way to help them find some place to stay. That is not always in the best interest of our society. So what do? We must be proactive to ensure that those who are formerly incarcerated in our community have a safe place to enter when they leave out of our prisons and out of our jails. Not only that, but those who are disabled in our community, still today, when they go to find some place to live in our community, they don't always have the opportunities to access fair and affordable housing. Some of them are turned away because of their conditions, and we have to advocate for them. Just because it's not your problem doesn't mean that it's not our problem. And that is the type of a spirit that we must have as a community, as a society, on how we deal with fair and affordable housing. When I think about the challenges that we face moving forward, I think about a story of my own family. Every year we would take trips and we would travel. And one time we were on the way to Chicago. And in that trip to Chicago, my dad was driving and we made a pit stop. And my mom was asleep in the front seat. I was in the middle seats, and my sister and my grandmother were in the back seat. And my dad got out of the car, went to the pump, put out his credit card, started pumping the gas. Unbeknown to him, my grandmother and my mother got out of the car. They went into the gas station. And when they went into the gas station, I saw them get out of the car. My mom was asleep, so she didn't know, but my dad got back in the car after he finished pumping the gas, closed the door, wrapped things up, cranked the car up, and got right back on the highway. And once I realized that my father wasn't going to stop, I said, "Dad, Grandma and Dana aren't in the car." And he looked back at me and said, "What do you mean they're not in the car?" I said, "They got out at the gas station." And so he paused, got off at the next ramp, and turned around and came back. And standing right outside the gas station was my grandmother holding the hand of my sister as they were standing there. And they got back in the car. My dad didn't say anything. He just let them get in the car and got back on the road. And as much as my sister would get on my nerves growing up, I didn't want her to be left behind at the gas station. And I surely didn't want my grandmother, who makes the best coconut pies in the world, to be left behind at the gas station. But I say that to share that we all have to have the courage while we're riding in the cars of our careers, the cars of our workplaces, the cars of our lives, to be able to call out the person who's driving the van, the bus, the car, and let them know that somebody's been left behind at the gas station. That somebody's been left behind who doesn't have access, somebody's been left behind who doesn't have opportunity, somebody who's been left behind because somebody doesn't like the way that they look. And if we're unwilling to have that courage, then we must get out of the car and let somebody in who are willing to speak up. Because that's the only way that we're ever going to be able to make the differences that we need in our community. That's the only way that we'll transform and ensure that neighborhoods and communities are thriving communities and thriving neighborhoods, that it doesn't matter what color your skin is, it doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter your sexual orientation, but because you desire to be a good citizen and a good participant in community, that you have the right to fair and affordable housing. And that, my friends, is the desire for all of us in this room because we're here today. And because of that, I know that we'll leave this place and we'll go to work and we'll be that person in the back seat that says, "Hey, let's slow down, let's stop, let's turn around, because there's somebody who's been left behind." Thank you.
Wow. All I can say is wow. What a keynote address. Can we please give him another round of applause? And so we would like to thank Councilmember Montgomery for delivering our keynote address in a very profound and challenging message today. And so I have a plaque for him which reads, 2018 Fair and Affordable Housing Summit Keynote Speaker, presented to Derwin Montgomery, Winston-Salem City Council East Ward, in recognition and gratitude for your service in furthering fair and affordable housing in the city of Winston-Salem. So Councilor Montgomery, thank you so much. Thank you.
So I do want to introduce who our panelists are. Their name, James Perry, if you would raise your hand and let everybody know. Robert Garcia. And Takesha Reed. And Marla Newman. Those are our panelists, and we will be asking them questions here on those items that we covered earlier. I am so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that you are here. We've been doing this for 13 years now, and it's always been very enlightening to me when we do this, and hopefully it's enlightening to you. So with that, we'll start the panel for the 218,000 Fair and Affordable Housing Summit with our first question. And our first question is going to go to Mr. James Perry with the Urban League. And we want him to describe a little bit about what the Urban League's relationship to fair and affordable housing is.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And before I talk about the Urban League, I'll just say that fair housing is something that's really near and dear to my own heart. I started my own career in the fair housing movement, and I currently serve on the board of the National Fair Housing Alliance. So the local Urban League traditionally hasn't focused very much on fair and affordable housing, and so this is a really new initiative for us. I'm really proud to say that we've partnered with the Center for Home Ownership to do annual home ownership events. And we've been able to bring through those partnerships almost all of the organizations in this room together to make sure that home ownership is available to folks in this community. The other interesting thing that we're working on is a fair housing testing program. And so it's in the works. It's really a really new process, something that I think is desperately needed here in Winston-Salem. Many of you who are familiar with fair housing know that one of the ways that you investigate issues around fair housing is to do mystery shopping, right? So if you receive a complaint alleging that someone has been discriminated against, you mystery shop. So let's say that someone who's an African-American male calls us and says that they've experienced discrimination, then you'll send 2 mystery shoppers out to the same apartment complex. You might send a white male and an African-American male, and they'll have the exact same qualifications to that apartment complex. And in theory, they should get the same results that the person who complained got when they called the apartment complex. If they get different results, then of course, you may have evidence of discrimination. So in my prior work, running a fair housing organization in Mississippi for 3 years and then running a fair housing organization in New Orleans for 10 years, we did literally thousands of investigations like this. And I'm sorry to say that we found discrimination over and over and over again. And oftentimes in communities where people presume that because it was extremely progressive and because people really got along, people presumed that discrimination didn't happen very much. But it's really only through this testing process that you're able to find whether or not discrimination happens. What we found over and over again is that you need a private organization, an independent organization, to assist a government organization that is able to investigate claims of fair housing. And so that's, when we look at the city of Winston-Salem and we see all the incredible work that's happening here, we see that that's one of the few things that the city doesn't have as a tool to enforce and make sure that fair housing is happening here. So it's something that we're working on to make sure that we can have both fair and affordable housing in this community.
Thank you, appreciate that. Next is Mr. Garcia, and he is with the Mayor's Poverty Thought Force, and he is going to talk a little bit. The question for him is briefly discuss the work of the Mayor's Poverty Thought Force.
I have a loud voice, but I think I should use this. Oh, thank you, Dan. And along with James, I'm very honored to be here, and I was very honored to be asked to be here. Back in the fall of 2015, Mayor Joines appointed Mr. Rogan Kirsch to chair this Poverty Thought Force, and I was honored, along with many people from the community, to be a part of this thought force to discuss poverty in Winston-Salem. And even though we're here to talk about housing and affordable housing, let me just tell you that from a poverty standpoint, and now that I'm a resident of 23 years here in Winston-Salem, proud to call Winston-Salem home, I was just in shock over some of the details, some of the facts, some of the data that came across our desk to study and to talk about. Dan and I were talking about it over lunch, and it is certainly one that is eye-opening. We completed the study in February of 2017. And I might add that on each one of your tables, you'll see a book. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get one for everybody, but you will notice this book right here, and it has all the findings from the Thought Force. And one of them, of course, being the housing. And also, if you need another copy, that way you don't have to arm wrestle for the copy that's on your desk, or on your table, I should say, you can go to Forsyth Futures website. Just type in Forsyth Futures and you will find it. And I think you will find it very interesting, if not alarming, some of the data and some of the stats that you'll find there. There was, along with that, we worked towards looking at education and life skills, workforce development, wellness and food access and insecurity, and it's amazing how it all ties into housing. It really truly is. They're all just interconnected. But one of the things, and just when we broke it down in regards to housing, the number one thing that came up was about transportation. I'm very proud to serve as the board chair of the Winston-Salem Transit Authority. So it really hit home when that study came back and talked about just how dependent many of our residents here, much of our population is on public transportation. So through WISTA and the fine people that work, I refer to it as WISTA, Winston-Salem Transit Authority, you might have read in the paper or seen, or if you've used the transportation system, that we have changed up our routes to accommodate people, to get them to their jobs. Because when we talk about being interconnected, a job has everything to do with it. If you're struggling to get to and from, you'll know what I'm talking about. Not all of us are unfortunately able to drive a car and park it in the parking lot. Many people depend on it. So that was the number one topic that came out of that, and I'm just going to briefly hit on 4 other topics that came out of that study. One of them was a program and I think Councilman was talking about it, and several people hit on it, but vulnerable populations, because it's just not poverty-stricken people, it's people that are mentally ill, substance abuse, homeless, of course, but there's different funding that we're trying to come up with for agencies such as the rapid rehousing programs. Samaritan Ministries is already very much a part of that, so that was one of them. Housing navigators, I think Wanda hit on it. So many people, needing to know their rights. And like anything else, I'm in the healthcare business also, and navigating through healthcare, oh my goodness. So the bureaucracy that's involved in affordable housing and what can they do. So this was the third one that was there. So we want to maintain or support in maintaining the housing and the questions that people have, because not everybody knows where to turn to. The fourth was expanding low-rate single-room rental housing. So that was the fourth thing that we were talking about. And the last one was, or the last one I'm going to mention about, was landlord incentives for Section 8 housing. Issues there regarding Section 8 housing, more oversight needs to be in place, but also, too, rewarding those people that are participating in Section 8 housing. So, in talking with Mayor Joines before the start of this program, very proud to announce that we have acquired several sponsors, and one very large sponsor, I cannot mention at this time, but you should be seeing something in the news, that will enable us to put together an agency, a full-time staff, to make this come to fruition, this whole program. This was a labor of love by a lot of people. One of the things that was astonishing is when we got together and we did a thing called the World Cafes, and we brought in people from all over Winston-Salem in different areas. And I hosted a table, and we changed it up. If any of you have ever participated in something like that, and to hear people and some of the things that are happening in the city, I must have had my mouth wide open the entire time. But it really brings to light the importance, and I applaud each and every one of you that work in your different areas and what you're doing, not only from the sponsors, but the people that, like you said, the people on the ground, the boots on the ground. So I encourage everyone to take a copy of this, look up at Precise Futures, some of the data that's in there. And again, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
The next question will be poised to Marla Newman, who is the director of the Winston-Salem Community Development Department. She just came to us in December and has been very busy. They're in the middle of, I know, a HUD monitoring visit. I know they've taken on some new things with the budget, and one of the big things that you've done is a housing study that looks like it's about ready to come out. We'd like to have you tell us a little bit about that study and what you think it will bring forth.
Sure. Good afternoon. And I too would like to say how much I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of this panel and be before you. Really excited about seeing such a collection of people come together and to know that you do this annually. I think that's a remarkable thing, and I'm glad to be a part of a community that takes this so seriously. As it relates to the housing study itself, we are looking forward actually to having an opportunity to go through the draft and read some of the information and get it together so that we can make it a part of what we do from a formal perspective and integrate it in the work that we do. We've been looking at some preliminary data that it shows that some of the work that we've already done actually, so if I can kind of step back and talk a little bit about the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Report, for instance, which we did last fall. So we submitted our assessment of fair housing to the federal government last fall. And that's significant for us because if some of you are aware, just a couple of months ago, the federal government decided to stop the submission of the fair housing assessment plans for the various cities. Winston-Salem, however, is fortunate enough that we got ours in long before the cutoff. We got our plan submitted last October, and it was approved by HUD. So we are one of the few communities that has a plan that has actually been enacted or approved by HUD for us to actually implement. So we're really excited about that. And with some of the information that we found, oh, okay. I thought I was talking loudly. I can hear you. So with some of the information that we included in our assessment that was approved by HUD, it seems to echo and reflect some of what we've also been seeing in the housing study. So we got some preliminary drafts of some information, and what I find is interesting is the tandem nature in which what we saw as challenges and needs for Winston-Salem also have started to surface in the preliminary information we've gotten from the housing study, as well as even the information that came out through the various public meetings and engagements and focus groups we've had earlier this year in connection with our 5-year consolidated housing plan. So we find that what we'll be doing is looking at not only the housing need, and some of the preliminary data shows that, and I think Councilmember Montgomery actually hit a couple of the nails right on the head when he talked about the level of need for our low and extremely low income residents, the 8,000 plus number of units. That's something that we've seen. We've also seen a shift in terms of even the demand for housing and housing types. So for instance, looking at the need for rental housing seems to be a greater demand for that with those who are in the 25 to 44 age group. And then when you look at those who are in the 45 to 59 age group, there's a reduced demand that's forecast. And then when you get to those who are above age 59, we're showing an increase. But the interesting thing in that demand increase is those folks in that particular age group are more interested in home ownership opportunities. So that creates an interesting dynamic for us, you know, that you have a certain segment of the population who's more interested in home ownership, tend to be older, which is kind of counterintuitive because you think about some of the younger folks in that age group, especially 25 to 44, when people are starting to get married, establish families. But we're finding, at least from the feedback we got in our various public participation meetings, that there was actually more of a demand for renter housing. So, you know, we'll be studying that report very closely because that will kind of help set the stage for how we go about making our investments in housing. We have, of course, our federal funds that go to housing, but then we also have local funds. We have a housing finance fund, but then we also have bond money that we're using, and Mayor Joines even mentioned earlier about the upcoming bond initiative in the fall that has money designated for housing. So looking at the housing study closely will kind of help us prioritize and strategize how best to invest those dollars that we do get on an annual basis.
Thank you. Thank you. Keisha Red is the Assistant City Attorney for the City of Winston-Salem. She works real closely with Human Relations and works on complaints that come from citizens of Winston-Salem regarding fair housing discrimination complaints. And so I'd like to have you just talk to us a little bit about the preponderance of the complaints you get, what you're seeing, and any trends that you might be seeing.
Well, thank you for having me here this afternoon. Our office works very closely with the investigators in the Human Relations Department on the fair housing complaints that they receive. They can be a garden variety of familial status or sex discrimination or gender discrimination. But here lately, we've had some interesting cases come up in that there have been complaints based on criminal records. And how people who should qualify otherwise had their housing application denied for criminal charges that were 20 years old. And so while we all understand and appreciate the need to keep our community safe, their HUD issued guidance, I believe it was in 2016, on how criminal records should be used because it is a tool. When you're assessing a tenant for potential, tenancy, you should look at things in a holistic way. And so if someone did something 20 years ago and they've not been in trouble otherwise, and it was not a violent felony or it was not a drug-related felony, or those things should not weigh as heavily as someone, say, who was arrested for carjacking someone last week. But when you have a mandate to keep our communities safe, sometimes what we've seen is that the admissions policies could be a bit heavy-handed, and so this zero tolerance approach to criminal records has trickled down. And so, I mean, if someone else were to see it, they would say, well, common sense, if this person hasn't been in trouble and is otherwise stayed clean, why would you deny them housing? But that is unfortunately something that we've seen. And the way that ties into fair housing is because if you look at statistically the groups of people that tend to have criminal records, you're looking at minority populations, you're looking at men. And so while this policy may be benign on its face, we don't rent to people with X criminal records. If that serves as a proxy to then say, well, we don't rent to black men, or we don't rent to Hispanic males, or to white women, or to whatever, then you have to take a step back and say, well, that policy, even though it's neutral on its face, has the potential to have a desperate impact and to affect a large section of the population, and we don't want to do that. And so our hope is that we can be proactive in working with our rental community and our apartment providers and educating them on the HUD guidance as to how these charges or criminal records should be analyzed in the totality of the tenant's application and not just this complete barrier, because as Councilmember Montgomery stated, if you don't have housing, that just sets off this spiral where you're either going to find somewhere to stay or perhaps engage in something that may not be legal because you don't have a roof over your head, or you're going to become a resident of the city shelter, of the homeless shelters, and then put a strain on the budget. And so what we need to do is kind of have a common sense approach to how we can both keep our community safe and provide places for people who have criminal records to live and give them an opportunity to resume with their life, because that's ultimately what we find that they want to do.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd also like to thank at this time the city marketing for the video watch on WSTV and YouTube. We'd like this to go viral, so if you're at home now or you go back to your office, we want you to log in to like the Summit post on Facebook at City of Winston-Salem City Government. So that little advertisement over, we'll go on to the next question. Next question is actually my favorite question. This is the question that I've been wanting the answer to. I think I know the answer to it, but I'm not sure. But we've had great discussion on this, and that is, it goes to Mr. Perry with the Urban League. In your opinion, is home ownership essential or optimal to wealth building?
It's funny that you prefaced the question that way, because I was going to say, well, this was a setup question. In part because, we're all housing professionals here, and so I presume that we're all here because we all agree that of course home ownership is essential to building wealth in the United States of America. It's absolutely essential. And so there's no question about it. And so I think the only real question is how do we make sure that more people have the opportunity to get into home ownership? So the Winston-Salem Urban League last year did its first ever State of Black Winston-Salem report. And in that report, what we found was that African Americans in Forsyth County have a home ownership rate that is 52% of the home ownership rate of white residents in Forsyth County. Right? So African Americans are half as likely to own a home as white residents in Winston-Salem. And so I think the very simple question is, how do we get more people in the African American community and the Latino community into home ownership? And that's, I think, a very difficult thing to do for a few reasons. I think the first one is the fundamental reason we're here, which is fair housing, right? When you look at incidences of fair housing, the place that you're most likely to see fair housing complaints is around rental housing. You don't see nearly as many fair housing complaints when it comes to mortgage lending. But when you look at mortgage lending testing, you see what you see is that discrimination happens at about the same rate. So I think one of the core points here is that we have to make sure that, of course, mortgages are available to folks at the exact same rate. I think the second issue here is that is about the aggressiveness of investing to make sure that that resources are available for folks who are under-resourced for the purposes of buying homes. And so this is one of the things that I think that, of course, both the county and the city does extremely well, but is, I think, continues to be very difficult to do. It's how do you make sure that there is low-interest money available, and, of course, that there is down payment money available for folks to get into home ownership. But fundamentally, when it comes to this question, people who own homes are the folks who are able to build wealth. And so I think there's no question that home ownership is essential to building wealth, not just in this community, but across the entire United States.
Thank you. Move on to the next question is for Mr. Garcia. And you mentioned one of the barriers you think to affordable housing is transportation, and we realize that is a big barrier. Can you name a few other barriers that were cited in the task force study?
Many of the barriers, well, the housing, when they were talking about that and why that came up in those World Cafes, it all kind of tied into employment. So one of the other barriers was employment opportunities around the city. who to call, when to call. When I stated earlier about needing someone from a navigation standpoint, most people found it very difficult to know where to go. That was probably the second biggest thing. How do I get it? Where do I get it? Now, not everybody has access to computers, the World Wide Web, et cetera, et cetera. And we saw that many of the agencies, and I'm sure there's agencies here present, that were just inundated with requests, questions, people looking. That was probably the second biggest one. It pretty much stayed in general with the fact that from the poverty level standpoint. At different times, and of course we're on a rise right now as far as unemployment, but at the time it seemed like it was still in somewhat of a lull at that time. So I would say from transportation to just from job insecurities and knowing where to turn to know that there are other opportunities. One of the things that we saw out there was a lot of people were being taken advantage of, believe it or not, in those particular areas. And so their hole kept getting dug deeper and deeper and deeper. And so that was one of the barriers. How do we get out of this hole? We committed to this. How do we get out of it? So in general, I would say that was just to kind of sum it up.
Thank you. The next question is for Marla, and you've talked a little bit about the housing study. We want you maybe to elaborate a little bit more on maybe specific recommendations that might be forthcoming as a part of this study.
So I'll definitely be taking a stab at it since we don't actually have the study before us yet. I suspect, however, though, that a number of the recommendations will be certainly that we look for more ways to create more affordable units, especially for those who are at or below 50% of area median income, both for rental housing as well as for home ownership, because there's a desire for home ownership at the level of 50% and below. Of course, that will require, as Mr. Perry mentioned, some additional subsidies. One of the interesting things that we find is people are paying rent, for instance, right? But it's just difficult to save the money maybe for the down payment or the closing cost. But if you can pay rent every month, there are homes that you can purchase where your monthly mortgage could be equivalent to or less than rent, right? So, what do we do to help folks get over that hump? So I suspect that'll be one of the recommendations that comes out of the study, is to see what we can do, how we can be creative with helping those folks who have an interest in both home ownership, and then how we go about creating more affordable rental homes. I also think that another thing we'll find is a discussion about how we facilitate the creation of more affordable opportunities with existing stock. One of the things we need to do is really have a greater focus on rehab. We have some great housing stock here in Winston-Salem. A lot of it needs some TLC. And so are there products that we can create that really incentivize acquisition and rehab, for instance, so that we can catch these properties as they're declining and stem that decline and bring those back and really help revitalize neighborhoods by doing that, because that's the other thing that goes along with that. When we invest in existing stock and do the rehab, and our department with community development, we have some products where we help communities do that, both owner-occupied. We also have a product that it targets investors who want to rehab some investment properties as single-family homes that are for rent. And then we do have an acquisition rehab product as well. But can we do more? How do we grow that? Because that does help existing communities and restore that pride. So I suspect that that'll probably be something else that we'll look at. And even with the issue around access to opportunity, the disconnect with transportation and jobs and economic opportunity, how do we create more affordable housing in areas of town where there are those opportunities and for job access and the like, and making sure that, you know, not only is transportation available, but are those communities even walkable? I mean, I think, you know, we have to probably take what might be considered that comprehensive approach to how we do community development and where we place housing and so forth. And I think part of that means more mixed income housing, so that we're not having more of those racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So we can have more mixed income communities, but also communities, again, that have the opportunity for resources for people to easily access services, education, jobs, and the like. So I think we're going to find that there'll be a number of findings and recommendations along those lines that we take a more holistic approach to how we characterize community, how we enhance existing community, but also improve access to other opportunities, communities of opportunity.
Thank you. Next question is for Ms. Red, and this has to do with gentrification. I think that's the big worry in our community is gentrification and how to invest in communities without driving folks out of their communities that have been there for years and have been the folks that have kept the community together. The question I have for you is, have you noticed any gentrification that could be rise to a fair housing issue?
I have not, but I see the potential for a fair housing opportunity. And by that, I'm thinking of our communities east of downtown specifically, in that those areas, the rental housing in those areas was built a long time ago. And it does not meet the design and construction requirements of the Fair Housing Act that were implemented, I think, for units to be occupied after March of 1991. And so if that is an area where, because I mean, if you just look at where downtown is being developed, and at some point it's going to spread, the existing units in that part of town that were built before the design and construction requirements were in place, I would think if there were going to be rehabbing and reinvestment, that units in that area would then be brought up to the fair housing requirements so that they are more accessible and, as you mentioned, more walkable, that we have curb cutouts, that we have ramps, that we have places where all members of the community are able to get around and to enjoy and to use the premises. And so I think there's an opportunity there for us to make sure that those gentrified areas will be accessible to all members of the community, because, you know, they're just old areas and we now have an opportunity to bring them current.
Thank you. And a little bit further on that is we always ask Mr. Perry the hard questions. This is the question that's very difficult, that I think a lot of community development people have know what the questions are, but they don't know what the answers are. And I think that's one of the things in my field is, how do you go about investing in a community without causing gentrification in the long run? So that's the simple question I have for you.
You know, a old school civil rights lawyer of mine, a friend of mine, said once told me that you fight like hell for integration, but you hope that it never happens, right? And he said that as we were working on a really difficult case, where of course we were arguing in the case that this community should be integrated, but the community had this very important historic black neighborhood in it. And if you integrated the community, then of course the big challenge was going to be that it was going to break up that historic African American neighborhood. So this really is the most difficult question that I think we all wrestle with, and it is this issue of the meeting place of gentrification integration, and frankly, what is the difference between the two? Right. So, there really is only one community in the United States of America that academics consider to be truly integrated, and that folks don't regard as having been gentrified. And it's a community in Illinois called Oak Park. So Oak Park is pretty interesting in that after having experienced a lot of difficult discrimination issues, the city decided that they were going to commit themselves to being a truly integrated community and a community free of discrimination. And so they fully funded a fair housing organization, and it was a different kind of fair housing organization. Usually fair housing organizations go around and do a lot of enforcement and a lot of litigation. But this was an affirmative marketing fair housing organization. And so what they did was purposefully advertised housing opportunities in a way that would ensure that housing was integrated. And so it is one of the few places that if you map it, you will see that it is fully racially integrated, and that there hasn't been any gentrification. And so, there's not enough time here to talk about the way that they've done this over 30 years, and it hasn't all been rosy. There was a study just recently that showed that there is discrimination that happens in Oak Park, but it's one of the few ways that you can accomplish integration without gentrification, and it's very difficult to do.
I appreciate that answer. That's the closest answer I've heard to a solution to the problem. I would like to let you know, too, that our committee that has been meeting to talk about issues really got into a long conversation about gentrification and how it might affect the communities that we're trying to invest in. And so as a result of that, we are planning to try to come up with maybe a one-day workshop that would be on gentrification, investment and gentrification. And we hope to do that sometime in October or November, so you'll be hearing back from us, because we do need folks to help us on that. And we always thought, I never knew there was a community that actually has done it well, so now we have somebody, and we might have to pay for their bus trip down here to talk to us about it. So we would love to have them and maybe talk to them in the future, but that's something to look forward to. It's an issue that is burning, and I think it's very pertinent to Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. At this time, I'm going to close down the panel discussion as we need to move on, but we would love to so I'm not sure what. Question. That's what I was going to say. I'll just get to that. So we are opening it up for questions from the audience. I don't think she has much faith in me over there, but we do want to have questions, and I think this is the best time to give these questions. We've listened now, you've listened, now it's your turn to talk. So we will have someone going around, I think Robert will go around with a microphone, so if you raise your hand, he'll be there quickly to get your question. We have one young lady down front that wants to ask a question. Oh. She was looking around like, who is that?
This is a little off topic, but I do think it goes hand in hand. And one of the things that was so striking for me in this report, what are we doing as a community specifically, or things that we can participate in that help feed our kids? We've got so many hungry kids in this area. It's just wrong. And housing is really important, but so is eating a good meal. What are there things that specifically you're doing as community organizations that we can participate in?
If I may, well, another honor I have is I sit on the board for Second Harvest Food Bank. And yet another alarming, eye-opening facts that I keep finding out. Yes, you're absolutely right. Because of the poverty that's out there in our children that are in our community, that go hungry every day, every weekend. I would encourage you or anyone to just contact Second Harvest Food Bank if for anything, just to get some details, go on the website, take a look. I will share one minor example with you of how alarming it is. When I first got on there, and we were talking about backpack programs. There's kids cafes, there's school lunch programs, et cetera. But when they leave on Friday, what are they going to eat? And there's certain schools and so forth that participate in the backpack program. And I asked them, I said, wow, 3 days worth of meals. May I see one of those? And they put it in front of me, and it was a gallon Ziploc bag. And what it had in there, most of our kids probably eat at one sitting. And I looked and I stared at that thing through an entire meeting, and one of the principals of a school turned around and said, I can't help but notice that you are staring. She goes, pretty amazing, isn't it? But that package right there to a starving kid is the world. To last from Friday after school all the way till they get there on Monday, it is astonishing. So just a shameless plug, but for Second Harvest Food Bank or anybody in your community, there's different entities that are part of that feed the children. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. And that makes it tough because again, it just adds pressures upon pressures upon pressures throughout their family. Then you go into the health, what happens to these kids because they're undernourished. And there's literally kids that are going without. And that it create health problems, yes. And then there we go. And then the dominoes just start falling.
So, again, thank you for bringing that issue up. And of course, hunger is a fundamentally important issue here in Forsyth County. The Urban League has about 20 different programs, and they go by all kinds of different names. Their employment programs, their housing programs, and I can go on and on and on. But in the end, they all serve the purpose of hunger, right? And so, for instance, through the city of Winston-Salem, we have a summer youth employment program where teens intern with businesses throughout the city. And so they end up interning for about 20 hours a week at various businesses, and then they get paid for their internship. Well, when we get their applications, what's pretty clear when we see an application for a family where it's a family of four and their income is absolutely zero, is that teen's income through that program and their hard work as they intern is what's feeding that family over the course of the summer. Right? So what's become really clear to us over the course of our work and over the course of our partnership with so many other organizations is that we need a fundamental shot in the economy, shot in the arm in the economy here in Winston-Salem. And so it's one of the things that the City Council is working incredibly hard on. And every single day, all of us are really focused on it. But when you get an ask from an organization like Second Harvest Food Bank, I'd encourage you to visit their facility. It's an amazing facility, right? Where every single day, what they do is bring in literally tons and tons of food, and then they divide it and make it available to families all throughout, not just this community, but all throughout the majority of North Carolina. It's a huge process and undertaking, and it's what we're thinking about constantly. But ultimately, we need everybody in this room and all throughout the city focused on it. If you sit in an opportunity in a place of privilege, it's for the folks like us who are thinking about this every single day. Your contribution is what helps us to accomplish this thing of feeding families.
And I'd like to add that a couple of things. One, through the efforts of Councilmember Dee Dee Adams, the city of Winston-Salem last year passed an ordinance creating the Urban Food Policy Council, and we have been working in partnership with the Forsyth Food Policy Council as well. It's a young organization. We have the board set up, but their primary mission is to look at issues of hunger and access to healthy foods in our community. So that's one of the things I would say, certainly if you're interested in somehow teaming up with, I'll be more than happy to connect you and anyone here as they're starting to figure out their path. But that was created because there was that recognition by Councilmember Adams that we have this disconnect. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Another thing through our department is we have helped support the creation of a number of community gardens and looking at various strategies for how we can do that on a broader scale, but also how we can look at getting young people involved in learning about how to grow and eat their own food. I had the opportunity, actually in Louisiana, there was a group who was funded by the United Way, and they had something called the Fast Food Farm. And it was a farm that was done, managed by children and so forth, but it actually had where all of the different things that go into making fast food, they had different stations at that farm so that the young folks could see the connection between growing the food that ultimately became part of that fast food meal that they may get. And it was really neat, and for fast food, it even meant like pizza and what have you. So that's looking at opportunities to be creative. And then the last thing I would mention is there is a partnership that our department has with Recreation and Parks this summer where there'll be activities for children where they'll have the backpacks as well. And it'll be a reading bus, a bus that goes around the community where the children will be given backpacks, there'll be reading activities, and then they'll be given something for the weekend as well. So we've got a few things going on, but anyway, that anyone's interested in this work, just please reach out to me and I'll try to get you connected.
Before we get to the next question, I'd like to mention and thank those folks that brought food, canned foods or other supplies to meet the needs of the victims of the tornado in Greensboro. I'm told that the City Hall will be open for you to bring other goods there if you weren't able to bring them today. With that, do we have any other questions?
Hello, and thank y'all for this opportunity. I just wanted to say, at my work with MBN, dealing with residents from across the city, one of the things that I have ran into is residents who have issues with repairs or just things where they possibly need to move. And it's really sad because a lot of times they are afraid of retaliatory evictions and things of that nature. And Human Relations Department does a great job when we reach out to them on following up and making sure that, that they do get some kind of accommodations. But what I found is that we run into a lot of residents who don't have the courage or who don't have the self-esteem to believe that there's something that they are offered that could be better. I wanted to know, can you guys think of a way that we possibly can, have different events during the year where we can make it, provide more information and more opportunities to say to those who don't feel comfortable or who don't feel like that they will actually get the help that they need to be able to come forward, because that's what I have an issue with. I run into a lot of residents right now, floor is about to cave in, but they don't feel comfortable going over the apartment complex they're at. They're afraid that something's going to be done because they've watched their neighbors. I spoke to one person the other day who 16 people have been put out in the last 2 weeks in a neighborhood, and she feels like some of those were retaliatory. So I just wanted to know, are you guys working on anything along those lines? Because we have a lot of low-income residents who face that, and they don't feel like, even though we have the great human relations department with the city, they don't even feel comfortable, or they're too scared to go and provide information about those who are abusing them, because it is abuse.
I'll start off and potentially pass it to Ms. Reed here, but so when you mentioned the floors caving in and the housing conditions, we certainly want to encourage people to at least call 311, call CityLink, and that way that'll come to our department and our code enforcement division. And if we're invited into a unit, we can inspect and we can cite. And that goes, to the owner of the property. That's I understand the challenge, though, with the courage and the fear about retaliation, because we do see that sometimes. But first and foremost, that property needs to meet minimum housing code, right? And so we have to know if there are problems in order to hold that landlord accountable. In terms of what could potentially happen as a result of that landlord being cited, I mean, we don't tell the landlord who let us know. We don't do that. The status of the property is the status of the property. It kind of speaks for itself, right? But we have to know so that we can take the steps to cite the landlord to bring that property up to code. I think the next step in terms of what could potentially happen with the tenant, I'd have to defer to our legal staff with the city on that one, if I could.
There is a provision in the North Carolina General Statute that prohibits retaliation based on the filing of a good faith complaint for repairs or with a state municipal agency, et cetera. So I'm going to put on my previous hat because for 12 years before I came to the city, I was a housing attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina. And as a housing attorney with Legal Aid, we ran into some of that same thing when we would have our community education events. But what I found was that usually it only took one. If you had one tenant that was brave enough to call in, say, an inspector or to speak out, and then the inspector came out, usually other tenants would kind of come out and engage that person. And I believe I would be accurate in saying some of the same thing has happened with our investigators with human relations, because in addition to fair housing complaints, they also do some landlord-tenant mediations. And so if they were out there talking to one tenant, that tenant would say, well, you know, Ms. Jones, who lives in apartment number 3, has had something similar. Or Ms. Jones would invite herself up and engage the investigator as well. So to answer your question, I cannot say proactively there's anything that we can do to keep the landlord from attempting to retaliate. But what I can say is that the law protects tenants from retaliation. And so to the extent that you can explain that and say, hey, if you call the CityLink and make the report and the inspector comes out, if the landlord tries to take action against you, you know, contact Legal Aid, contact Human Relations. While, like I said, we can't ensure that the landlord won't, we can make sure that they are protected within the confines of the statute if the landlord does try to take some sort of retaliatory action based on that tenant filing a complaint.
Unfortunately, our time is ending up, but I would like to say that I think some of us can stay around maybe, and if you have questions for each individual or an individual, hopefully that you can get that answered afterwards. We do thank you for coming out today. I think Wanda's going to come up and say a few parting words.
Can we give our moderator, Mr. Dan Cornelis, and the panel a round of applause? We truly had wonderful experts here with us today, and they imparted some wisdom, and we appreciate them for that. And I appreciate you, because as I stand here and look out at the room, my goodness, almost all of you are still here. Wow. Wow. Good job. But anyway, I hope that you had some really good key takeaways today. I know that if you noticed, we didn't just stick to housing. Things kind of spread out a little bit to hunger and transportation. But all that does is it shows that housing is so very important and is at the core of a lot of issues in our community. You can't talk about housing necessarily and affordable and accessible housing without touching on those other areas. And so I just want to thank you all who did raise those points, and those of you who asked questions, and even if you didn't ask questions, we appreciate your support and your attendance and participation today. So we are going to do this all over again next year, and we encourage you to join us again next April during National Fair Housing Month, which of course this is National Fair Housing Month. And if you have any questions, any follow-up, don't hesitate to contact us or anybody on the panel for that matter. I hope you all have safe travels, have a wonderful remainder of your day and week, and we hope to see you next year. Thank you.